I learned early in life that the quietest people in the room are usually the most dangerous ones to underestimate. I never advertised what I'd built. I never led with credentials or dropped names at dinner parties. When I met Daniel, I was in a phase of my life where I was deliberately stepping back from the noise. No press, no panels, no profile pieces. Just me, living simply, deciding what the next chapter looked like. He thought he was getting a woman who needed him. He wasn't entirely wrong. I did need him, the way you need a season. You move through it, you learn something, and then the weather changes. We'd been married 3 years when the dinner happened. His firm's annual clients event. Rooftop venue downtown. The kind of gathering where everyone performs a version of themselves for 3 hours and calls it networking. I'd attended 2 of these before and kept mostly to myself, which Daniel had always translated as shyness. It wasn't shyness. It was selection. I wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry except my watch, a vintage Cartier my mother had left me. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I rarely was. We were standing in a cluster near the bar. Daniel, his senior partner Raymond, 2 clients I'd never met, and Raymond's wife, Claudette, who had the particular energy of a woman who decided decades ago that other women were competition. The conversation shifted to business. One of the clients, a heavyset man named Foster, was talking about a failed investment in a tech startup. He was frustrated, looking for someone to blame. "The whole sector is unpredictable," he said. "Unless you actually know what you're doing, you stay out of it." "Annalise tried her hand at something in that space, didn't you?" Daniel said. He turned to me with a smile I recognized, the one that was really for the room, not for me. "Tell them about your little project." Little project. I looked at him calmly. "You can tell them if you'd like." He laughed. "She built some kind of app, a few years back. Didn't really go anywhere." Claudette tilted her head sympathetically. "Oh, that's sweet. A lot of people try." Foster nodded with the authority of someone who has never been corrected in public. First-time founders usually don't understand the exit landscape. It's not their fault. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip. Daniel was still smiling, still performing. "She's creative, just not really, the business side wasn't her strength." There it was, delivered casually, dressed as affection, designed to position him as the serious one, the capable one, the one these men should be speaking to. I didn't correct him. I didn't say that the app had been acquired. I didn't mention the number. I didn't name the company that bought it, or the year it happened, or the fact that Foster's own firm had been a minor stakeholder in the acquiring company, which meant he had, indirectly, already benefited from what Daniel had just called a project that didn't go anywhere. I smiled at no one in particular and said, "Excuse me for a moment." I found the restroom, stood in front of the mirror for exactly 90 seconds. Not to collect myself. I was already collected. I just needed to make a decision. By the time I returned to the group, I had made it. The drive home was quiet in the way that has texture. "Good night," Daniel said, loosening his tie. "Foster loves Raymond. I think we're going to land that account." He glanced at me. "You okay?" "Fine." He accepted that. He always accepted that. It had never once occurred to him to push further, and that, I realized, told me everything I needed to know about what he thought my inner life was worth examining. The change wasn't dramatic. It never is when it's real. I stopped filling the silences. Before, when Daniel came home tense, I'd read the room and adjust, ask the right questions, redirect toward comfort, smooth the edges of his mood with conversation and warmth and dinner timed to his arrival. I stopped doing that. Not coldly, just, I stopped. He noticed within a week. "You've been quiet," he said one evening. "Have I? Is something wrong?" "No." He waited for me to elaborate. I didn't. This was the thing about emotional labor. It's invisible until it stops. Then suddenly the room feels different and no one can identify the source because they never knew what was holding it up. I started noticing all the other places I'd been quietly propping things up. The way I remembered every preference of his, medium rare, no onions, the specific podcast he liked on Sunday mornings, while he still asked me, after 3 years, whether I took sugar in my tea. The way I tracked his mother's birthday, his colleagues' names, the anniversary of his father's passing, and built small gestures around each one. The way I had assembled, without ever being asked, a complete emotional infrastructure for a man who didn't know it existed. I didn't resent him for benefiting from it. People use what they're given. What I had finally stopped doing was pretending that it cost me nothing. His mother called me the following Sunday, as she did every week. Miriam was a woman of great warmth and greater certainty. She loved her son with a specific blindness that some mothers carry like a credential. "Daniel says you've been distant," she said. "I've just had a lot on my mind. You know, marriage takes work. Both people have to show up." I agree completely. "He means well, Annalise. He's not always the most articulate, but his heart is in the right place." "I know you believe that." A pause. "What does that mean?" "It means I understand why you see him that way." She shifted tactics. "You're very independent, and that's admirable. But Daniel needs a partner, not a roommate. He needs to feel like you're with him." I hear you, Miriam. I did hear her. I also heard what she wasn't saying. That my independence was the problem. That my silence was aggression. That the correct response to being diminished in public was to soften further, give more, become easier to hold. I thanked her for calling and said goodbye warmly. Then I sat in my home office, the room Daniel called your little reading nook, and I opened my laptop and responded to 3 emails that would have surprised him considerably. I want to be honest about something. I was not angry exactly. Anger requires a kind of surprise, and I hadn't been surprised. What I felt was more like clarity, the specific, settling feeling of a decision that has been building for a long time, finally locating its words. What Daniel had done at that dinner was not an accident. It was a pattern wearing its most public outfit. 3 years of small corrections. 3 years of, let me handle it, and you don't need to worry about that, and I'll explain it to them. 3 years of being introduced as his wife in rooms where, had they known, I might have been introduced differently. I had allowed it. That was the part I sat with most honestly. I had chosen simplicity, and he had mistaken it for smallness. And I had been so committed to that quiet chapter of my life that I had never once handed him a page that would have shown him the full book. That wasn't entirely his fault, but what happened next was entirely his choice. He found out on a Thursday. Not from me, from Foster, actually, who had done some routine digging after a separate conversation and had called Daniel, apparently somewhat confused, to ask about a discrepancy between what Daniel had said and what the public record showed. Daniel came home that evening with a different face. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Tell you what?" "About the acquisition, about all of it, the amount, the..." He stopped, started again. "Foster called me today. He seemed to think I knew." "I assumed you knew the broad strokes." "Annalise." I looked at him. "Daniel, you let me stand there and say those things, in front of clients, in front of Raymond." "You said those things." "You could have corrected me." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" I thought about how to answer that. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to say it in exactly the right way. Because the problem wasn't that you didn't know the number, I said. The problem was what you thought when you didn't know it. The problem was what you decided to do with that thought, in public, in front of people you wanted to impress. He was quiet for a moment. That's not fair. You called it my little project. I didn't mean... I know what you meant. And I know you meant it kindly. I know you weren't trying to hurt me. That's the part that's hard to explain. Then explain it. I looked at him evenly. No, I said. I don't think I will. There's a particular kind of silence that descends after a woman stops explaining herself. It's not hostile. It doesn't require anything from the other person. It's simply the removal of something they had come to depend on without realizing its source. The constant translation, the softening, the emotional scaffolding that made them feel understood and centered and safe. Daniel looked for ways to return to what we'd had. I watched him try, and I recognized each attempt, and I felt something that wasn't quite sadness, but lived in the same neighborhood. He brought flowers once, midweek, for no occasion. Thank you, I said. They're beautiful. I've been thinking about what you said. Okay. I want to understand. I want to do better. I nodded. I didn't open a door. Not because I wanted to punish him. I want to be clear about that. But because I had finally, honestly, looked at the architecture of what we'd built, and I understood that the thing he wanted to do better was not the same thing that needed to change. He wanted to know me more accurately. What he didn't yet understand was that accurate knowledge was no longer the same as access. A colleague of his reached out to me directly about 2 weeks later, a woman named Priya, whom I'd always liked, sharp, observant, the kind of person who notices what others perform. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I said yes. We sat across from each other at a small place near the waterfront, and for a while we talked about nothing consequential. Then she set down her cup and said, "Can I be honest with you? Please." The night of the rooftop event, I was there. I heard what he said. She paused. I wanted to say something at the time. I didn't, and I've been bothered by it since. I looked at her. You don't need to apologize for that. I know. I wanted you to know that someone else saw it clearly. That landed somewhere I hadn't expected. Not because I needed the validation. I had been clear-eyed about that evening from the moment it happened. But because there is a particular loneliness in being diminished in a room full of people, and having one of those people name it, quietly, over coffee, 2 weeks later, mattered in a way I hadn't realized I was carrying. Thank you, I said. And I meant it fully. What are you going to do? She asked. I thought about it. Not the logistics. Those were already in motion. But the larger question underneath hers. I'm going to stop making it easy, I said. For anyone. She nodded slowly, like she understood exactly what that cost, and exactly what it was worth. Miriam called again 3 weeks later. He's not okay, she said, more quietly than usual. I'm sorry to hear that. He loves you. I know. Then what do you need from him? Just tell me. Tell me what would fix it. I looked out the window. The street below was ordinary. A man walking a dog, a child on a bicycle, the usual texture of a Tuesday afternoon. Miriam, I said gently, some things don't need to be fixed. Some things just need to be seen clearly. I don't understand what that means. I know, I said. I know you don't. I didn't leave dramatically. I didn't pack a bag in the middle of the night, or deliver a speech, or give him a list of grievances organized by year. I simply became fully, quietly myself, and I let him encounter that woman without the buffer of performance. Some people, when they finally meet you without the accommodations, love what they find. Some people realize, slowly and with great discomfort, that what they loved was the accommodation. The last real conversation we had before I began the process was brief. He asked me if I still loved him. I thought about it honestly, the way I try to think about everything that matters. I love the version of this I believed in, I said. I think that's real. I think that counts. But I looked at him, the full, clear-eyed way I should have been looking at him for 3 years. But I'm not available, I said, for a life where I have to make myself smaller so you feel bigger. Not anymore. He didn't argue. I think, somewhere under the hurt and the pride and the confusion, he knew that what I was saying wasn't cruelty. It was just the truth, finally given the room it had always deserved.